Alrighty. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. This is Sam over at Scorpio Rising Astrology, and we are here about to go live. So let's get to it, shall we? So this is the morning Astro-Babble, where you have sent in copies of your birth date, place, and exact birth time. And I just feel really lucky to be able to do this with so many lovely followers. We're going to take these 8 charts that everybody has submitted, and we're just going to do a live kind of consult read, give you some Astro-Babble backgrounds, give you some tips, some tricks, some things that, even though it's not your chart that we're reading for, are probably very relevant to you. And let's go ahead and get to it. If you would like to submit your name for the queue, hey, everybody jumping on, just send me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and via private message. Do not leave it in the comments, and we will, we'll add you to the queue. But for now, let's pop open a fizzy water. Oh, and if you'd like to schedule a consult, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Good morning, Kara. Good morning, everybody jumping on. ScorpioRisingAstrology.com is the website. I'll post the link to the YouTube channel where we post the replays of the live streams. And yeah, let's go ahead and do it. All right. First chart we're looking at this morning is Aubrey. So Aubrey was born 1:56 a.m. in Limerick. Let's take a look at Aubrey's chart. So Aubrey has a Gemini ascendant, which makes Mercury the ruler of her chart. Now, Aubrey does have a little bit of an issue here because Aubrey has the ruler of her chart retrograde. We have Mercury in Leo retrograde in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. We also have the Sun in Leo here and the North Node in Leo here. So first thing, when I see Mercury retrograde in the 3rd, there's always this idea of dyslexia, speech impediments, and the mind or the voice being backwards or scrambled. So we need to be aware of that in Aubrey's chart, first and foremost. We also have Mars retrograde in Aquarius, very close to the South Node, very close to the MC up in the 9th. And that also paints a picture of the scholastic environment for Aubrey being very, very difficult. So we want to make sure that we really nourish the lack of stigma is a good way to say it, because I think people who have learning difficulties or who learn differently, who are not necessarily dumb, or they can't get it right, or they can't speak correctly. It's really about making sure that they have the confidence, that Leo Sun, in order to speak their truth, as opposed to getting tripped up on the logic. Because Mercury retrograde, especially in the 3rd house of communication, is about overthinking the words that you say, and not necessarily letting the stream of consciousness go, and holding back words, but also really trying to process mentally the words and failing. We really need to make sure that Aubrey has a good sense of what it means to be verbally appropriate, but also not to hinder that expression of the writing, teaching, communication house, because there's already a lot of stuff there, especially with the malefic and the 9th of higher education. Special tutors may be needed, and or, like, if Aubrey were to channel this chart effectively, she might learn other languages before she does kind of normal language. She might be able to sign really well. She might do really well with totally different languages like Mandarin. Like it might be really interesting to get her exposed to other forms of speech, not necessarily what we would consider normal speech or normal communication. Because especially although Mars in Aquarius retrograde is a difficult placement, if channeled properly, especially in the 9th house, the mastery of language can be very, very specific and very, very focused. So that's a really interesting part of Aubrey's chart that we're seeing first and foremost. We do have the moon at 0 degrees Pisces in the 10th. I enjoy that placement. We do have Neptune in Pisces up in the 10th as well. Neptune was retrograde at the time that Aubrey was born. So there is a little bit of this intuitive knowing of success, but also there is a muddiness, there is a lack of focus, there is a Neptunian influence that can start to invade, would be a good word, or permeate that 10th house of success if left unchecked, because we do have Jupiter and Scorpio in the sixth house of work. I'd say that there's a little bit of remediation there because Jupiter ruling that Neptune pretty strongly from the house of work, which leads to success, does give us a little bit of hope for that Neptune influence in success. In fact, I think especially because Cancer rules her second house of finance and the moon is up in that 10th house of career, that she might actually make a lot of really good money in those watery realms of work. And success and career, specifically being like a detective, using her intuition, using potentially artistry or spirituality, those things that Pisces really succeeds at, incorporating things like fantasy, drama, working with the softer, subtler tools of a craft that aren't necessarily emphasized, but that she would actually succeed really, really well at. So that's an interesting part of Aubrey's chart. Let's see what else. We do have a little bit of family stuff that we need to talk about. We have Venus in Virgo, the sign of its detriment in the fourth house of family. So we have this maternal influence, which is rather restricted, which is rather held back. Venus herself prefers to be compassionate, loving, non-discriminate with her affections. When she's in the sign of Virgo, all of that affection is withheld. All of that love is withdrawn. It's tried to put into a box. She puts on this really tight mini skirt, her glasses, she puts her hair up, and she assumes this like I'm Manager Karen type of energy, and that's not necessarily where Venus likes to be. So avoiding that pitfall in the home and really making sure that her femininity is allowed to be expressed, and that Venus energy of love, of abundance, of compassion, of caring, of all of the just mushy gushy kisses gets a chance to be expressed in the family, as opposed to being withheld, withdrawn, or there being stipulations on that affection. When I see Venus in Virgo in clients' charts specifically, there's this idea of a feeling that there's a prudish vibe in the family that really needs to be rectified, because especially with the Leo issues that we're seeing in the third house with that Mercury retrograde and the third of communication, if she's not allowed to unfold and unfurl her own Venusian instincts, then that Mercury is really going to get in her head, because Mercury rules Virgo, and that Mercury is going to start to say, but you should be doing it this way, and you definitely shouldn't be doing this. And that's a problem when it comes to Venus and her ability, especially in this chart, to help Aubrey communicate effectively, because we've already got detriment here. We need that confidence. We need that unconditional love in order to nurture and foster all of those Leo placements, which are a little bit stifled. Okay, good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. I appreciate you. Fatima, Lynn, Tony, everybody, thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's go ahead and continue running down our chart list. Let's talk about Scott. Scott, my darling. We have Scott born at 3:15 p.m. in Champagne. And let's take a look at Scott's chart. Interesting. Theme of the morning is already starting to emerge. So we have the Sun in Leo, as well as Mercury in Leo, again in the same chart. This time, and this is what's really interesting for those of you who are watching about the nuances of astrology. We have the same planets in the same sign, right? Sun and Mercury in Leo. However, in this chart, they're in the 9th house of higher education, travel, and foreigners. Yeah, they're not in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. Mercury is direct instead of retrograde, and Mercury is not ruling the chart. So we have a much healthier placement of this Sun and Mercury in Leo in the 9th house, and it really talks about Scott's love for learning, his ability to pick up new concepts very quickly. When I see Mercury in Leo in the 9th, really fun habits start to come up, like extreme forms of note taking, journaling, writing, but in a scholastic way. Like they have a textbook, but they take so many notes during the class that they actually create a textbook of their own. That kind of thing. I just find that super funny. Let's see, what else do we see in the chart? We do have some square action here. Not necessarily a fan of that, and this is where we get some This is where we get some of the issues in the chart coming forward. So we have Mars at 3 degrees of Taurus, Moon at 20 degrees of Taurus, both making a sign-based square to to Mercury and the Sun from that sixth house of work, health, and pets. So when we find squares in the charts, there's often a sense of friction. There's a sense of mixed priorities. There's a sense of, I can't do this without sacrificing that. And there's friction that happens because of that turmoil. And energy is too far and few between. Because we have the moon in Taurus in the sixth, that's a killer work ethic. That's somebody who really brings a lot of steadiness, a lot of ease. The moon is in its exaltation in Taurus. It's a great place for the moon to be. It brings a lot of emotional Taurian vibes, where this is the person that can walk into a room and just make somebody feel at ease, is a good way to say it. But we also have Mars in Taurus here, and this is that fire under the butt that Mars puts underneath Taurus to get stuff done. Unfortunately, where the square comes in between the ninth house is that idea of work versus play, that idea of work versus learning, that idea of putting things into action versus continuing to be a bookworm about it. That's an issue. So we really want to make sure that Scott has the ability to not just learn stuff, but also to implement what is learned and to create practice and diligence, and focus on the day-to-day tasks as opposed to constantly leaving the nose in a book at the end of the day. Let's see. We do have Neptune and Sagittarius in the first, as well as Sagittarian Ascendant. That puts Jupiter as the ruler of the chart. I'm a fan of that. Whenever, each sign that rules the chart has a different makeup. They have different skills, different traits. And in fact, when people come to see me for sessions, it's not necessarily about their sun sign. It's more about the ascendant that we really focus on in the chart. And in Scott's chart with the Sagittarius ascendant, it gives a little bit of kick, a little bit of mutable fire, a little bit of spice, which I really, really enjoy. However, we do have Neptune here in Sagittarius. From a medical perspective, we need to watch chemicals and hormones, especially chemicals and hormones that would affect metabolism, like caffeine, alcohol. Things that are naturally toxifying to the liver or the thyroid metabolism need to be avoided, because we have Moon and Mars and Taurus in the sixth, as well as Neptune, that planet of chemical addiction type stuff in Sagittarius, the sign of the liver, in the first house of health. So that's something that we just need to be super, super pinpointy on, is especially if things start to get muddy or out of control, watch the chemical ingestion, watch the way that things are affecting metabolism and liver. That'll give you a good idea of whether or not your blood sugar is off, whether or not, different things are medically playing into the fact that you're feeling scattered. Interesting placement, for sure, with Venus at 2 degrees, just about to conjoin Pluto at 2 degrees, the MC as well as Uranus up in the 11th house of friendship, social groups, and humanitarian efforts. Interesting. This also rules Venus in Libra, the sign that it naturally rules, is also ruling the 6th house of work, health, pets. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of Scott's day-to-day work is with the community at large, if there is that humanitarian effort that's very present in the chart. But because we have Venus and Pluto conjunct, this is a marker of power. This is Pluto, which brings that underworld energy, that deep sense of spirituality, that unbridled power that is buried underground for safekeeping, that could strike at any moment, but it prefers to stay hidden in the shadows. In that community house, conjoined Venus, the planet of loveliness and grace. I think that there's a really interesting flow with Scott's community efforts, going from love to ecstatic artistry and dance with that Uranus and Libra, the MC really telling us that his heart is in the community, his heart is in the larger social groups, and being active within that Aquarian space would be a good way to say it. Especially because, although I don't do ABC, the 12-letter alphabet, I think that the 11th house, especially when Libra is here, especially when Venus is here, does take on that Aquarian vibe. So we have a lot of community outreach with Scott's chart when it's connected to the 11th house of friendships and the 6th house of work. There's a lot of good synastry there, but I think we really need to push our awareness in Scott's chart to the North Node in Capricorn in the 2nd house being ruled by Saturn in Cancer, the sign of its fall, conjoining the South Node by 5 degrees-ish, wide orb, in the 8th house of business, death, taxes, estates. So when it comes to Scott's mission in life or his personal north in terms of where his soul is kind of striving to grow from or grow to, we have this idea of material wealth being a big part of this equation. And I think that this is really where Scott uses his 11th house placements of community to understand that wealth is abundance. There always is money at your disposal. There is no lack truly when a community comes together because all the resources are at hand. And if you just grease the wheels of friendship, then everything works out the way that it should. And then we have this work ethic in the 6th house that really brings home a lot of that sustainable, a lot of that daily grind, a lot of that really good farmhand working energy that then shuffles itself into that North Node in Capricorn in the 2nd, where money is accrued and wealth is understood. And we really have that Capricorn lesson of effort over time to produce success, to produce reward coming through in the chart. Excellent. Cool. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for saying your chart. Thank you, everybody. I know a lot of you are messaging me. Thank you for sending in your birth dates, places, times. Also, thank you for watching my TikTok videos that I posted in the story this morning. I'm having a lot of fun with that. I've been getting some depressed messages from people in my massage community and the astro community, friends, family, and I'm trying to make your day by giving you a smile on your face. But anyway, let's keep going down the queue. We're on chart number 3 of 8, so we need to keep going. Kateri is the next chart who we're reading for. Kateri was born 3:13 a.m. in Flint. Let's take a look at Kateri's chart. So we have, I'm a fan of this. So we have the ascendant at 22 degrees in Libra, and then we have the North Node in Libra as well at 24 degrees. So they're 2 degrees apart, really, really good. I like to see the North Node conjoin the ascendant because the ascendant is a very powerful place in the chart. It indicates a personality marker. It indicates the sign whose light blessed the person at the time of their birth. I really like that imagery. And whenever we have Libra on the ascendant, there's a natural beauty to the body. There's a natural likableness to the self, which I really, really enjoy seeing. We have some issues, but we'll talk about those in a second. Right now, that North Node on the ascendant really talks about the goal of Katerina's life is to define the self, is to understand what it means to be liked, to be likable, to love, to be lovable, all of those, as well as to be the peacekeeper, to be a social justice warrior, all those things that we have Libra representing in the 1st house of self. Libra is being ruled by Venus in Capricorn in the 4th house of family. We also have Mars in Capricorn, Neptune in Capricorn, and Uranus in Capricorn, all in the 4th house of family. This means that Katerina's chart is very family focused, very home focused. She finds a lot of herself in the home dynamic. However, that home dynamic is not pleasant. Although we do have Venus here, Venus is somewhat restricted in Capricorn. It's an earth sign, which Venus can appreciate, but it's a little bit too rough around the edges. It's a little bit too go, go, go. Venus would prefer to be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit less stuffy, less dry, would be a good way to say it. Mars in Capricorn is in the sign of its exaltation in this earthy sign of Capricorn, but Mars is still a malefic. In a night chart, it's the lesser malefic, so she's got that going for her. But when paired with Neptune and Uranus all in the same house, Neptune being that muddy, all over the place, confused, slightly spiritual but escapist tendency, and then Uranus in Capricorn, again, held back, but still that lightning strike of a planet that's really bringing chaos and upheaval into the place where it's laid, is a good way to say it. Because we have this stellium in Capricorn in the 4th house, we have a lot of conflicting energies in the home. We have a lot of potential gender issues in the home because Mars and Venus are in the same house. But Neptune and Uranus really, I think, bring out the worst of that Mars. Even though it's technically a great Mars, it's still going to be triggered by all of this chaos that the outer planets are bringing into the fourth. So we have some family karma stuff that we need to be working on, Kateri. We really need to understand that although home is where the heart is, home is not necessarily healthy, is a good way to say it. And that's part of the chart's dynamic that we need to appreciate. What I'd really like to focus on, though, is you have another stellium in the chart in Sagittarius in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. You have Pluto in Sag here, the Sun in Sag here, Jupiter in Sag here, and Mercury in Sag here. That's your escape route, honey. That's where you get all of that beneficial energy in the chart to work for you, for sure. And just to top it all off, the moon is in Leo in the 11th house, making a trine by sign to all of this fire placements. I absolutely love it. So although family sucks, and although we have a lot of chaos and turbulence there, we have an escape route through the third house of writing, teaching, communication, also neighbors and siblings. So that third house is really going to be your saving grace, especially with Jupiter here, the most positive planet in the chart. Jupiter is in Sagittarius, the sign of its own making. Absolutely lovely. Jupiter is just on the edge of combustion with the sun, just 1 degree. So we have a lesser strong Jupiter, but still a strong Jupiter in the third. And I always like to see Mercury in the third house because that third house is the house of writing, teaching, communication. Mercury, the planet of the mind, does very, very well here, especially in a spunky sign of Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter in the same house. It's good chemistry in that third house. I'd really focus on your writing talents, teaching talents, speaking talents, especially with that moon in Leo. You've got a natural affinity for crowds, honey, Katerina. So the more you actually stand up and speak your piece, the more you're going to be able to leverage that baggage in the fourth house of family towards fulfilling your life mission of understanding who you are as a person, which is really what that North Node in Libra on the Ascendant is trying to get you to do. Wow, yeah, that was pretty concise. I think I'm on fire today. I think I'm on a roll today. Thank you, Katerina, for your chart. That's really all I got to say about that. Cool. So hello, everybody jumping on. Thank you for watching. We're doing 8 charts this morning for our Astro-Babble live. If you would like to submit your chart, if you would like to tell your friends, family to submit their charts, I am still accepting charts for the queue. It is rather long, but give me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and we'll throw you up on the queue. And these videos will be posted on social media for replays and stuff like that. I know that a lot of you are international and submitting charts internationally. So let's look at Sarah's chart. So Sarah is 4 out of 8, and we'll look at Sarah, who was born 8:41 p.m. in Saudi Arabia. Oh, we have another Libra Ascendant. That's nice. But a different Libra Ascendant because Venus is in Aries, the sign of its detriment, and it's in the 7th house, making an opposition to the Ascendant. That's tricky, Sarah. So let's talk about this. Let's walk you through this, honey. So we have a Libra Ascendant. Whenever we have Libra on the Ascendant, there's a natural beauty to the body, to the self, a likableness, yeah. But we do have the Lord of your chart, Venus, in that 7th house of relationships, which means there's an over-identification with finding a spouse, with finding a significant other, with finding somebody to spend your life with. I don't really like this dynamic when I find the ruler in the 7th house, because it's almost an over-seeking of, I must find my other half, otherwise I'm not complete. And we know that that's not true when it comes to life. We know that it's about claiming personal power. We know that we as people are more than just the person that we choose to be attached to the hip at with. So that's something that we need to just be aware of, is your tendency to fling yourself into relationships might be a little bit detrimental to your chart, especially because the relationships that you tend to fling yourself into have this proving quality. A Venus in Aries is about the conditional love of proving oneself to one's partner. So when we have Venus in Libra in the 7th, it's not this unconditional Venusian love. It's a very conditional Arian Venusian love, where it's, if you're not progressing, if you're not improving, if you're not working on yourself, I don't have time for you. And I'm infinitely frustrated because you're being a lazy lump on a log, and I don't love you as much if you were just working on yourself. So that's something that Sarah will need to just be aware of, that laziness is your ultimate turnoff. Despite you having such sensitive placements, a little bit of a catch-22 here, honey, because we have the North Node and the MC conjoined in the 10th house of success, but the Moon in Capricorn is conjoining the South Node in the 4th house of family, which as a whole is making a grand square in your chart, Sarah, giving you some friction and some again, like catch-22 double-sided stuff. So we have this idea, Sarah, where your heart, your moon is in the 4th house of family, but that's your comfort zone. That's where you find rest and restoration, sure, but it's the easy way out. You should be working towards the 10th house of career success, honey. At least working from home, like at least do your work in your own space to integrate the best of both worlds. But when you ask somebody else, especially a partner, to succeed and to try new things and to be brave and daring and courageous, and then you kind of slink back into your home and you're like, well, I'm just going to take it easy today, that's a double standard. That's a double standard, honey. So we need to be aware of that first and foremost in the chart, that there is a lot of ease in the home, but that ease can turn into toxic ease, especially when it comes to working with a spouse who might not appreciate that double standard. Let's see, we do have Pisces Sun at 0 degrees in the 6th house. So whenever we find a major planet on the cusp, there is an idea of the sun being in Pisces being correct, but we also would read or interpret that as an Aquarian sun as well. So there's this idea of the ego being very Piscean, very artistic and spiritual and martyry and emotional in that 6th house of work, and potentially having a bleeding heart in the workplace as a really good interpretation of that. But then we also have this sun in Aquarius on the cusp, which would be in the 5th house of creativity, parenting, children, where her Mercury retrograde in Aquarius is, where her Uranus in Aquarius is, and where her Neptune in Aquarius is. So we have this egoic identification potentially sinking back into that childish state. And this is, I think, something that the moon conjoined the South Node is really talking about as well. We have a second hit in the personality, Sarah, of you like playing baby is a good way to say it. And also that double standard of trying to play parent at the same time. So you trying to tell people what to do, but then simultaneously backpedaling and say, oh, I'm just baby, like, don't mind me, I don't know what I'm doing. That's something that we're going to need to work on personality-wise. And I think the way that we work on that personality-wise is by accessing that Sun's Jupiter connection, that Jupiter and Gemini up in the 9th, where we really throw you into a scholastic environment, expose you to foreign culture, get you to travel a little bit more, see the world. That's where we really start to find a lot of your chart lighting up in a positive direction. Despite that Mars and Sagittarius in the 3rd house making an exact opposition, we have a good conflict and a healthy conflict, I think, where you start to learn, you start to grow, you start to create some positive friction in your chart when you get exposed to the world around you, as opposed to, again, staying in your comfort level and thinking that you know everything, because although you're charismatic, that doesn't translate into knowledge. Yeah, we need to acquire that knowledge, that Jupiter and Gemini in the 9th house, in order to rectify, would be a good word, some of these double standard and wishy-washy placements in the chart for Sarah. Yeah, cool. Thank you, Sarah, for submitting your chart. Thank you, everybody who's continuing to message me because of my TikTok stories. I will be doing more of those. I find them absolutely hilarious and true. That is how Gemini and Pisces be. Okay, so we are halfway through the queue. If you would like to submit your chart, I need birth date, place, and time. And also, if you'd like to schedule a consult or learn astrology, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Let's talk about Vicky. Vicky was born at 3 a.m. in Wigan. Okay. Oh, this is fun, Vicky. I like your chart. So we have the ascendant in Capricorn. Yeah, makes for a very hard start to life. But we have Jupiter in Capricorn as well. Jupiter, although it's in its detriment in Capricorn, opposing its natural ruler of Cancer, Jupiter does bring luck wherever he goes. And so there is a silver lining to Vicky's chart that I think is really, really positive. In a worst case scenario, it does double down that Capricorn energy and inflate some of that Capricornian stubbornness. But on a positive note, it does soften some of that Capricorn energy as well, which puts the ruler of the chart as Saturn in Gemini, which is very close to a Venus-Mars conjunction in Gemini in the 6th house as well. Yeah, so we have, again, whenever I see Mars and Venus in the same house, there's an idea of gender issues being very prominent in the life. Bisexuality, the idea of feminine, masculine principles, especially because this conjunction is in the 6th house. This Venus-Mars conjunction will happen in the workplace. So we're going to find a lot of the female masculine, the feminine masculine, Gemini bipolar energy happening in the workplace, getting into that, like everywhere you go, Vicky, for some reason, they're always trying to pit the guys against the girls. And that's just something that I see a lot in the chart, especially when it's in the 6th house of work, health, pets. We do have Saturn ruling the chart in Gemini. Saturn in Gemini in the 6th, I enjoy because Saturn is naturally grounded and a little bit too strict. And Gemini opens up that earthy, restrictive planet energy in the 6th. So although, Vicky, when it comes to work, when it comes to health and pets, like you're very much about the long haul. You're very much about taking things to the nth degree over time and taking it slow and letting that process unravel. But Gemini does give you a little bit of speed, does give you a little bit of option, and does create a little bit of fun, a little bit of energy and air flitting into that workspace. Interesting, we do have a mutual reception between Mars in Gemini in the 6th and Mercury retrograde in Aries in the 4th, as well as Sun in Aries in the 4th. Oh, this is fun. Vicky, if you haven't considered getting into real estate, that might be something that you could work on, although I'm not necessarily a fan of this Mercury retrograde in Aries. The mutual reception does mitigate it, and the Sun in Aries does help with the 4th house as well. I think because although nobody has a perfect family, we do have some communication issues in the family, potentially secrets, especially of a military nature because of Aries, or a violence, abuse, or a very competitive household on the positive end of the spectrum. When we look at the 4th house Sun and that 4th house Mercury being ruled by Mars in the 6th, again, anything that you can do work-wise involving the home, the house, the family, absolutely excellent for you. A natural state of success will bring that about. Let's see. We have a moon in Pisces. Moon in Pisces in the 3rd. So we have a really strong emotional connection to siblings. That moon in Pisces ruling the emotions, but also giving us a sense of spirituality, also giving us a sense of artistic flair, especially when it comes to creative writing, teaching communication, words that are almost channeled, very spiritual. Because we have Sun in Aries ruling the South Node in the 8th house of death, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a lot of early death in the family. Yeah, that's a really tough placement where the 4th house of family and the 8th house of death are connected. The South Node is that energy suck in the chart, so we find a lot of leaving, a lot of kind of toilet flushing sound effects in the 8th house, and with that being ruled by a planet in the 4th connecting family, we have some deaths in the family that will really shape and mold a lot of Vicky's early childhood experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why home is so important to Vicky, and why it's so important to let especially the financial stuff of taxes, estates, and all of the things that can be wrapped up in a home when family is concerned and when that family passes away. She uses her Capricorn nature to filter through those very emotional details, not necessarily getting overly emotional, but still respecting that moon in Pisces in the 3rd when she speaks, when she writes, when she teaches. And she's very, very qualified to walk people through that separation when it comes to their home buying experience, but also potentially if parents were to pass and estates needed to be measured or allocated. Yeah, cool. Good stuff. Excellent. Thank you, Vicky, for donating your chart to science. Yes, thank you, friend. I'm glad that you like the post. Patricia, Raven, Monica, Emma. Thank you, everybody who's joining on Instagram and Facebook. We are just having fun with charts this morning, as with every morning, doing the Astro-Babble. And we have 3 more charts to do. So let's talk about Kara. Kara was born 7:16 a.m. in Richmond. What do we see in Kara's chart? So Kara has, we have Neptune on the ascendant, and we have Mercury in the first house as well, all in Sagittarius, being ruled by Jupiter and Leo. Oh, Jupiter and Leo retrograde. Okay, Kara, there's some stuff that we need to unpack here. So Mercury in the first house, especially in Sagittarius, gives a quick mind. I enjoy that, especially an ideal mind, like an overly positive mind. We need to be focused on the toxic positivity, though, Kara, and that's something that I see a lot with Neptune, Mercury in the first, is that idea of escapism, of fantasy, of going too far into the extreme of, oh, everything will be okay if we just wish upon a falling star. And that's not like, the real world isn't Camelot, honey. You know, it's not, we don't have a white picket fence 24/7. That fence gets dirty. That fence gets broken and old and broken into. And, you know, we have all these things that we need to prepare for in life. And unfortunately, that Mercury-Neptune conjunction can somehow and in some way give you an idea that there's a little bit too much of a silver lining to the world when we need to be a little bit more practical. So that's just something to be aware of. Although the ascendant ruler, that Jupiter in Leo retrograde, I think really puts you in a great position to travel, really puts you in a great position to learn, interact with foreigners, great sense of spirituality. But again, we need to make sure that that spiritual journey does not engulf the personality and does not destroy your sense of self, because this is ultimately about you learning about you learning about the journey, the process, potentially success as well. And that's not something that we get when you get lost in the ethers or lost in the books or lost in the foreign cultures. You can't escape your life hard enough. And that's a little bit of an issue. We do have a new moon in Capricorn, as well as Mars in Capricorn down in the second house of finance. When it comes to finance and seeing a new moon in the house of finance, there is a tendency to hoard. There's a tendency to be emotionally ambivalent. Yeah, without emotion, emotionally apathetic when it comes to money, at least on the outside. But inside, when we see the moon in the second house of finance, we need to understand, Kara, that the heart is connected to your bank account. And and as well the sun when it comes to ego and self-esteem. And that's something that on a negative side can be very miserly, but on a healthier expression, not healthier, but on a higher expression, when I work with clients who have this placement, this exact placement, there's a feeling of when the bank account's low, you are low. When the bank account is high, you are high. But that is a false sense of security. And it doesn't really allow you to take control of your life in a way that is helpful. And instead, it really kind of throws you to the whim of your spending habits, which, although you've got some really good long-term success spending habits, we do need to make sure that we're not in the moment attached egoically, self-esteem wise, or emotionally in a way that it deters you from doing what you need to get done. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about work stuff. Working with addiction, working with trauma, big part of your work. We have that sixth house ruled by Taurus, making Venus the lord of the sixth house of work. Venus is in Scorpio, the sign of her fall, and she's very close to Uranus and Scorpio, all in the 12th house of hidden enemies, hospitalizations, jails, institutions, karmic healing, the places where we put people to work on themselves, and there's only a 50-50 shot that they'll actually make it out alive. working with hospice, working with people who are, again, on the edge of death or transformation. That's one of the things that you actually do really, really well. And I think that the new moon helps you do that, because it gives a very new moon babies and people with a new moon in their chart, I think, and I speak as one of those people, we tend to withhold our emotions. We tend to allow space for other people to vocalize their feelings, and that makes us naturally equipped to listen first and talk second, and really put people at ease and allow them to divulge information in a way that really puts us into a counselor role, whether we like it or not. And I think that that's a good thing. So use that to your advantage in your workplace. I think that that's really where you go from here, is to make sure that you can establish long-term success, but also doing the work that you're uniquely equipped to do, which is working in that trauma space, working in that 12th house space of the hidden parts of life that we don't necessarily like to show to other people, let alone the public. And part of that Neptunian energy, I think, is really good for that too, because on a higher expression, Neptune in the first house does give us this air of this airy fairy, whimsical kind of essence to the personality, and that liminal sense does benefit, if channeled appropriately, does benefit the 6th house of work, being in that 12th house of hidden enemies. Cool. We do have the MC at 18 degrees, Pluto at 19 degrees up in Libra in the 11th. We need to be aware, Kara, that friends are not every person who wants to be your friend has your best intentions at heart. And I know that that's a difficult lesson that you've had to learn, and it will only truly make sense about halfway through life, around 50. But don't let that stop you from trying to make friends, because although you've been deceived, although friends turn into enemies very easily with you, we can't burn bridges. And that's also something that, like, you adopt people into your life in order to fix them, to make them better, but at the same time, just because you're working with them emotionally or you have that connection doesn't mean that that's a friendship connection. And that's where things get really, really muddy, is once people get better, or once you trigger enough buttons, they push you away, they attack you, they ghost. And that's a sign that it was never really a friendship to begin with. Okay, that's the final word on Kara's chart. We got about 20 more minutes before the hour is up, and we've got 2 more charts, so we might finish a little bit early today. Let's talk about Wesley. Wesley was born 4:35 a.m. in Lynchburg. We have an Aquarius Ascendant, Mars in Aquarius as well, ruler of the chart opposing the Ascendant. Goodness gracious. Just a theme. So we have the Ascendant in Aquarius, making the default personality rather distant, slightly genius, but socially awkward, especially with Mars in Aquarius, that tendency to be overly aggressively awkward, kind of in your face, like blurting out things before they're supposed to be said, especially in earlier life. Boundaries need to be something that Wesley has worked on throughout the life. But when we find the Lord of the chart being Saturn in Leo retrograde in the 7th house of relationships, again, an over-identification with the idea of being in love, being with a partner. You're in it for the long haul when it comes to that Saturn being present in the 7th house of relationships. That indicates a very, very long spousal connection when you do have one. But again, it's that idea of, I'm not complete without my spouse, and that can be difficult, especially when it comes to developing a personality. But I think Aquarius is naturally hiding behind people, places, things that have a better face than they do when it comes to being out in front of people. And so having a spouse, especially with that Leo energy, who's very good in the public, who has that charisma, who has that ability to woo a crowd, and you can kind of stand behind and just be like, that's my spouse, while you tinker and do your things in the background. I think that's a solid strategy. We do have a little bit of issue between the 3rd and the 9th houses. Again, we get back to this writing, teaching, communication thing, and the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education. trying to publish work for papers, academic research, trying to gain favor with those in higher places, especially from a scholastic setting, is going to be really, really difficult until halfway through the life. There's going to be a lot of paper wasted, a lot of ideas thrown away, a lot of those writing, teaching, communication themes being scrapped, being south noted, just flushing them down the toilet because they're quote unquote not good enough. But really what your chart is saying from a timeline perspective, at least, Wesley, is it's not necessarily about whether your ideas are good enough. It's just about you getting credibility over time. And unfortunately, nobody wants to trust somebody who's green and is wet behind the ears. And so you'll find that the older you get, the more naturally that Pluto matures in your chart in the 7th house, or the 9th house, and you start to ripen your connection to these ideas, these higher learning concepts, these working with foreigners and travel, and it'll get easier as you go. But again, that's something that only age will produce, specifically around 50. Okay, what else do we have? We have a moon in Scorpio up in the 10th. Man, you're just hitting all the fixed signs. I'm not really a fan of this stubbornness that you have, Wesley. We have so many ideas, so many thoughts, so many, frankly, brilliant ideas, but you keep them all inside. You tear them apart. You think that they're not good enough. You hesitate. You hide. Despite that Mars and Aquarius placement, like, you're really holding back. And I don't necessarily like to see that, especially with the moon in Scorpio and Uranus in Scorpio up in the 10th, because that'll turn into Crohn's disease, that'll turn into bowel issues, as the ideas literally ferment in the gut. I'm not really a big fan of that. I think one of the ways that you can really mediate the chart, Wesley, is by you retreating into the home base. You specifically even working with siblings, neighborhood efforts, and really trying to stay local. Because when you tap into the resources that you have that are grounded, the people who are in your community and the people who you know, like, and trust, there's going to be an abundance that's accessed in the chart via this Jupiter and Taurus placement that I think will provide a lot of comfort to you. But without that comfort, a lot of these fixed signs are just chewing each other up. They're really trying to over-investigate, trying to read into things too much, trying to refine when things are already refined. And if you kick back in that 4th house of family and you really allow yourself to have this steady, easy, predictable fortress of a home where you can retreat and be taken care of and come back to a sense of normalcy, you're really going to find that a lot of the issues that you have in your chart fade away. Yeah, because they're not really important at the end of the day. They're all demons of your own making. They're all monsters of your own design. You're playing in your own Jurassic Park, and you have the remote at your disposal. But if you want to be chased around by metaphorical dinosaurs all day, by all means, Wesley, go ahead. Because that fixed stubbornness in your chart really does say that, again, like, you've decided how things are supposed to be, and they're not necessarily supposed to be easy. But I think the easiest part of your chart is really retreating into that home space. And if you allow that to take place, then that's really where we find success. We do have this Mercury in Pisces and this Sun in Pisces in the 2nd house of finance that I'm not too thrilled with. We already talked about the idea of the Sun being in the 2nd house and egoic self-esteem connection to finance. So when finances are low, you're low, etc. Self-worth is very tied to money. But then also when we look at Mercury in the 2nd house in Pisces, Mercury is in its detriment in Pisces. It's the sign that Mercury does not like to be in at all. So you don't really have a great head for money. unfortunately. So we really want to get a CPA in here. We really want to get somebody else to worry about the finances, because you're going to miss things. You're going to trip things up. You're going to get the numbers wrong. You're going to like think that you do it right, triple, double, quadruple check it. In that order, triple, double, quadruple check it, and you're still going to miss something. That's something that we see a lot with Mercury and Pisces in the second, or a planet in detriment in the second house, is plus it's combust the sun. So like you're not even going to know what you did wrong until it's too late from a financial perspective. So get somebody else in there, get somebody else to worry about the finance, because I think that that relationship will really help ground you again. The more you can interact with people, the more you can really get into that place of surrounding yourself with the people you know, like, and trust, instead of isolating and working at the top of your ivory tower. That's where your chart should be. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Good morning, Marlina. Good morning, everybody who's jumping on. We have one more chart to go. If you would like to submit your charts, just send in your birth date, place, time via private messenger. Let's look at Marlina's chart. So Marlina was born 9:27 p.m. in Sebring. Interesting. Yep. Okay. So we have Pluto on the ascendant. Pluto in Capricorn retrograde in the first house of self. There's going to be a natural association with death, the underworld, all topics involving shadow, darkness, gothic attire. When it comes to the identity, Pluto, the lord of the underworld, touching the ascendant, gives that not necessarily scary, but that underworld vibe permeates the sense of self. Now, one of the things that Pluto in Capricorn retrograde that I've noticed does is bring up the past a lot. So one of the things that Marlina might find an absolute obsession with is old things, like all the black and white movies, all the old clothing styles, all of, again, that gothic, literally, not just gothic in terms of like punk rock, dress in black, but gothic in terms of the architecture style, gothic in terms of the aesthetic, the true nature of gothic. That's really something that Marlina has a very strong affinity for in the chart, and I think would be really interesting if she tapped into that, the love for that. So we have the fifth house of children, parents, sexuality. We have Mercury here. We have Mercury here in Taurus, Venus here in Taurus, Mars here in Taurus. When we look at the fifth house of children, parents, sexuality, creativity as having both male and female signs, the idea of sexual components when it comes to parents, when it comes to her own sexual identity, there's going to be a lot of gender issues. There's going to be not issues in terms of bad stuff, but just that's going to be forefront in the mind. Mercury, especially because it's on the cusp of Gemini, it's at 29 degrees, just on the edge of Gemini. Mercury is known for being androgynous. Mercury is known for assuming whatever shape Mercury wills at that time, and to see that in the house of sexuality paired with Mars and Venus, I think that there is going to be an interesting discussion when it comes to, as Marlina evolves, what sex is, what sexuality is, what it means to be a parent later on in life, and to raise a child who also needs to decide for themselves who they are, as opposed to the body that they were born into. Really interesting stuff. Yeah, that's gonna be a thing in the chart. We have a connection between the fourth, fifth, and sixth houses. So childcare as a job, babysitting as a job, definitely something that Marlina would be like super good at, especially with that Pluto Capricorn on the ascendant. There's an air of maturity to the chart, although there is a fun Gemini component with the sun and Gemini in the sixth. I think there is a level of maturity. There's a level of wisdom that comes to Marlina's chart, old soul type stuff. We do have the North Node, the Moon, Neptune, and Jupiter all in the second house of finance, ruled by Saturn in the ninth, going to school for finance, going to school for money stuff, going to school for taxes, again, working with people's money. Money is one of the things that transcends time. And so I think there is a natural sense of Marlina not just loving other cultures and loving especially those older cultures, before everything got so technicolor and complicated, simpler times, but also the idea that money, wealth, and value transcend not only culture, but time, and that being a very big part of Marlina's life to master finance in general. What else do we see in the chart? Yeah, 10th house MC, the 10th house of success long term, is being ruled by that Venus and Taurus in the fifth. So being known for potential gender advocacy issues, parenting children, like children specifically, their children becoming famous, something that I see a lot when the ruler of the 10th is in the fifth. That's something that I think is really interesting. So should Marlina choose to have children, and again, like great parent, when it comes to that Venus and Taurus in the fifth, a lot of good fertility in the chart for that. But should she choose to become a parent, there's going to be this really strong idea of all of those fifth house topics of parents, children, sexuality, creativity, her being known for that. And really making sure that that side of her is nourished and fostered, and that those experiences are kind of pre-planned, because it can be a unique life path for sure. Yeah, finance stuff, self-identity stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think that's all we got for Marlina's chart. That's a lot to kind of chew on, but all of the chart comes back to those specific aspects. Cool. We did end a little bit early for a change, as opposed to being, 105, 108. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate you. Thank you for sending me all these messages. My phone and Facebook keep buzzing. I really, really enjoy these morning Astro-Babbles that we do. Feel free to send in your chart, your children's chart, your parents' chart, all with consent, of course, to Sam at to me via private message. If you would like to shoot me an email, schedule a consult, you can shoot it to sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com, or just go to scorpiorisingastrology.com for the website, the online classes. Check out the YouTube for previous recordings of the live stream and the previous charts that I've featured and done, as well as check me out on TikTok with all the fun astrology related nonsense that I'm up to there. And in the meantime, may the stars be ever in your favor.